Welcome to a new episode of the Ajay Bruno Show. We have a special guest today, and no, it's not Special Guy 29. I'm joined by an Emmy Award-winning journalist who you may know from his work on Dateline NBC, among his other endeavors. Without further ado, Chris, it's a great pleasure to have you here. I want to ask you a few questions, and then you're free to walk right out that door.
Can I have cookies first, AJ?
We only have brownies today.
That's fine. Hope they're fresh.
So I'm going to start with your origins. I read that you had gotten into journalism because you were interested in what happened to Jimmy Hoffa. I'm curious what inspired you about that, and out of pure curiosity, what do you think actually did happen to him?
Well, it's interesting. I grew up about 1.5 miles from the restaurant where Hoffa was last seen. They found his car, and it's suspected that he was kidnapped from there. And it really started as a lark. I rode my bike up there, and all the FBI agents and the cops and reporters and network correspondents were cycling in and out over a period of days, and it just fascinated me. And I kind of got bit by the bug, back then. And when I went off to school, started to work in radio at Michigan State and carried it on from there. But in terms of what happened with Hoffa, I mean, pretty clearly he had upset some people in organized crime. He was kidnapped. I think if you look at the FBI files and the people who have studied this thing, he was taken and pretty quickly killed. And one of two things happened. The other was put in a garbage grinding facility in the Detroit area, or dipped in a chromium plating vat someplace on Detroit's east side in an automotive-related factory. But, the theories have abound where he was taken, what happened to him. I remember several years ago when I was at Dateline, I was working on a murder mystery story, and the producer took place in Michigan. The producer was talking to a character in the story who is an inmate at Jackson Prison, Southern Michigan Prison in Jackson, and he calls me and said, "Hey, I talked to this guy. He says he knows something about the Hoffa case." I said, "Well, him and 6,000 other inmates, you tell him to give you something that no one else knows to prove that he's telling the truth about Hoffa." So he comes back, he said, "Well, he said they killed another union leader, and he was involved in the disposal of the body, and the body's buried here." And we have an address in Michigan, near Bay City. And we called the sheriff's office and tell them about it, what happened, and they sort of said, "All right, well, we'll take a look." They dig, they find a body there. So all of a sudden it's like, whoa, does this guy really know something about Hoffa? So he said, on the same property, I was part of a crew that buried evidence involved in Hoffa's disappearance. There's a briefcase with a syringe that was used to sedate him, and some playing cards used to kill some time by the kidnappers. Called the Oakland County Prosecutor's Office. This is what I got. I can't, tell you whether it's true or not, but if it is, it's a big break in the case. It would link Hoffa to precise kidnappers via DNA technology that wasn't available all those years ago. So they get ready to go up there and dig, and we're kind of, thinking this might be something. And the night before, the prosecutor's office sent an investigator to the prison and put the guy on a polygraph, and he failed it miserably. So I get this call. I'm from Detroit originally, and I'm having dinner with my mom, and this call comes through and says, "I got bad news. He failed the box," meaning the polygraph. I said, "Well, what do you think?" He said, "Well, we should go anyway, just in case." So we go up there, and it was a wild goose chase, and nothing was found. But, I've been on a number of those wild goose chases over the years, and will we ever know precisely? I think most people who did know precisely are gone by now, and so there's a little bit of speculation. But I think clearly it was tied to organized crime. Clearly people didn't want back in power, and clearly, they did a good job of getting rid of the body.
No, it's one of those big mysteries. I mean, they showed in The Irishman whether that's what actually happened, but who knows?
Well, that's one theory, and that the Irishman is a real character who claimed to have been involved, and was the subject of a book, and I think even wrote a book, and I'm familiar with that story and that scenario. And you have just as many people saying it didn't happen as it did. I mean, obviously the people involved in the film bought into it, and it made for a great film. But I don't think that's exactly the way it went down.
Sure. So can you tell us more about your early career in journalism, how you got involved in NBC and working for Dateline?
Well, I started out at the NBC station in Lansing, Michigan, while I was still a senior at Michigan State. Actually, got a very lucky break, and for $4.85 an hour, I covered every city council meeting and fire that occurred in the district of Lansing, the city of Lansing. And when I graduated, I stayed on for a year and got some good experience covering the state capitol and some other things. And Went to Tampa for 2.5 years and was a wonderful experience there. Got a chance to travel internationally and fill in for some of the NBC correspondents overseas in Central America, and that was very cool, and fulfilled a dream of going back to Detroit and working at Channel 7 Action News, and where I'd always wanted to work, was there. And then at Channel 4 I was in Detroit for about 10 years altogether, and then got the break in 1993 and went to NBC in New York and did that for about 20 years. And now, still at it, doing all kinds of different projects. And we've got a new Predator show coming up. We've got 2 new series on Discovery Plus that are very exciting. The podcast, Predators I've Caught, and some new television projects even after that. So it's very cool. It's a busy time. It's a fun time for me because I'm getting to do a lot of things and get involved in not just being the reporter, the correspondent, or one of the talents involved, but also getting a chance to do some executive producing, which I find very fulfilling, and it's a real cool time for me.
That's great. Now, I was going to ask you about Predator, obviously, later, but you said there's going to be another season, which I've been waiting, and I think lots of people have been waiting to see whether that would happen or not. Can you tell us any more? Is this for sure happening? What stage is it at?
Here's what we've done, AJ. We've gone out and shot a couple of Predator segments, and we had to do them in a little different fashion because of COVID and some other restrictions. But a couple of those are out now on my YouTube channel, Have a Seat with Chris Hansen. And then we're in negotiations right now and having talks with television entities about doing it, in the traditional sense, but sort of taking it to the next level. And I should have some news on that in the next several weeks. But we've got places lined up and investigations ready to go. And, the whole scene has changed. I mean, think about this. In 2004, when we did the first Predator investigation, we merely had decoys in chat rooms on AOL and Yahoo. Well, today there's been an explosion of social media platforms and sites where, kids and everybody in society is communicating, and it creates a lot of opportunity for predators to approach kids, and especially during this pandemic. I mean, for a year, kids' faces have been glued to computer screens and smartphone screens, and parents have been in the same home but glued to their own activities, and so it's created this environment where kids can be approached more frequently and with greater intensity than ever before.
Mm-hmm. So how did Predator first get started back in 2004? Like, who thought of it? I mean, what were the origins of this whole series?
I was chatting with a buddy of mine who was a reporter in Detroit, a fellow who took my job when I left to go to NBC, and he told me about this online watchdog group called Perverted Justice. And I thought, well, boy, if we could, take advantage of their ability to pose in chat rooms as underage boys and girls, and we could combine that with our ability to wire a house with hidden microphones and cameras, it could be a very, very compelling television show. And so I pitched it, and it wasn't conceived as a separate series. It was conceived as a story for Dateline NBC, where I worked as a correspondent at the time. And we did it, and it worked, and it was compelling. And so we did it again and again, and it turned into a series. But that's not the way it was conceived. I honestly, AJ, thought that, we'd do it 2 or 3 times and nobody would show up. I'd be like the Maytag repairman, taking a nap on the kitchen counter. But, as of a month ago, we did another one in Michigan in conjunction with the Genesee County Sheriff's Department. And, we had a prison guard surface. We had, and show up at the scene. We had a state employee who had done work inside the governor's mansion. We had a babysitter. We had a guy who was a former cop in Lebanon, an automotive engineer. It keeps on going. And I think there's more activity now than ever before.
Mm-hmm. I read or saw an interview you did where you went out to Long Island, I guess, for the first investigation, and you were surprised. Is anyone going to show up? And apparently you had to rush there because guys were already coming. So
yes, that's absolutely right. I mean, I was in a car driving over the Throgs Neck Bridge, caught in traffic, and I'm thinking, oh, God, what if I just spent tens of thousands of dollars of NBC's money and nothing happened? And I guess that's good news if it's not as big a problem as we thought. But we knew from Perverted Justice, which at the time would, do the decoy work, and when somebody, made a date to meet the child, they would post their information online on their website. So we knew it was happening, but it was a matter of infiltrating that world and showing people what was going on. And sure enough, the traffic cleared, and I got a phone call from my producer at the time, Lynn Keller, saying, "Look, we've got 2 guys showing up in 45 minutes. Where the hell are you?" And got there just in time to do the first two confrontations and interviews, and it was quite something. I mean, it was one of those things where you couldn't believe it was happening as it was happening, and only with some perspective and after the fact, you figure out, oh my God, not only did we capture this, this is incredible television as well, and I didn't really realize that until after the first one aired, and Stone Phillips called me at home. The show had been taped and put together, before it aired. And he his reaction was, I've never seen anything like it. And I said, well, imagine living it, buddy. And so we knew that we had something that was very compelling. And the overall lesson there is that for whatever topic you're doing as journalists, especially television journalists, is, our job is to take viewers on a journey of discovery, to take them to places that they wouldn't normally see, and have them hear things they wouldn't normally hear, and get inside the mind of a criminal and hear the voice of a victim in a way that we can prevent other people from becoming victims or criminals. Yeah. And I think that's part of what we're supposed to be doing. And look, we caught heat for, pushing the boundaries of traditional journalism, and I'm, more than willing to cop to that. I understand that, but we were and are today, just completely transparent about our methodology and all these things, and so there's no, nothing we keep secret, and we keep doing the stories that we do that we think are important.
Mm-hmm. I've seen that you've caught heat from that, but at the same time, what did they expect as an alternative? I mean, think of all the people you have not caught because the investigation stopped, or there were even more of them.
Yeah, well, I mean, law enforcement does this sort of thing all the time, and I, talk to dozens and dozens, if not hundreds, of people in law enforcement every year about this and other investigations, and so it continues. And as I mentioned, we're doing it again. Mm. And look, yeah, there were critical articles and journalistic publications about working too close to the police, or is it entrapment? And it's not entrapment. And nobody ever got off because it was construed to be entrapment. It doesn't even fit the 4 corners of the definition of entrapment. Mm-hmm. And it's carefully done. And yeah, there are other vigilante groups out there doing it on one form of social media or another, and I can't vouch for what they do, and I don't get behind or support what they do. And vigilantism can be dangerous on a number of different levels. But what we do, I would argue, is responsible, important, and it takes people into a world they wouldn't normally see.
Yeah, that's not a world most people want to see, I think.
But, no, it's not. Yeah. And I remember when I wrote the book on the subject, years ago, and I was on the book tour, and I was on Jon Stewart's show, and he said, "Do these guys have anything in common?" I said, "Well, the main thing they have in common is that, they don't stand out of a crowd. It could be the guy, standing next to you in line at the grocery store or the dry cleaners on Saturday morning. He looks at me as only Jon Stewart can, said, Chris, I would change dry cleaners if I were you."
Yeah, I remember you actually knew someone from the commuter train on one of the investigations.
Oh yeah, and the one we did 4 or 5 years ago that aired as Hansen versus Predators on the syndicated show Crime Watch Daily that I was doing was Charles Lawrence, and I hadn't seen him in a couple of years, but I knew him tangentially from the train, and he walks in, and he was there to meet a 13-year-old boy, and he looks so familiar. I'm thinking. And the minute he sees me, he says, Chris, no, Chris, it's not what it looks like. And so the crew thinks that it's, somebody who just knows me from television. And I knew it was something different. And I called another buddy of mine, and I said, hey, who's that guy, Charles, who was on the train? And he said, oh, Charles Lawrence. I said, oh, my God, you won't believe this. And what happened? I said, well, we're doing a Predator shoot in Fairfield, Connecticut. And he just walked into our house. So I actually called him, a year or so after that all happened, and wanted to know if he wanted to do an interview or talk about it, and he politely declined. But yeah, I mean, it just shows that this can involve anyone.
That's crazy. So maybe highlights isn't the best word, but across all the investigations you did, what are some of the moments that really stood out to you the most in terms of being quite memorable for the wrong reasons?
Well, I think it's about 100-way tie for first, but the two guys who walked in naked. I mean, God, you can't make that up.
No.
And like a couple of fellows who showed up twice. In fact, one was naked and showed up twice. And you mentioned Special Guy 29 in the opening of the show. John Kennelly, who is not that special, nor was he actually 29, showed up in our sting operation, the second one we did in Herndon, Virginia, outside of Washington, D.C. And, the decoys play different roles. Some are conservative and demure. Some are a little, racier and bold. And this one, as part of her profile, was saying, it'd be really cool, or he was saying as part of his profile, it'd be really cool if you walked in naked. Sure enough, we didn't think he would do it, but he took off his clothes in the garage. We had a garage cam out there, and I'm looking at, my security guy, Ronnie Knight, and we're looking at the monitor and say, he's really going to do this. And I walk out, and the towel was on the fridge, and the video is pretty famous, and handed it to him. And I said, went through the whole interview, and the next day, we're back up and doing our jobs, and I hear all this commotion upstairs in the room where all the decoys were, and I ran up there to see what was going on, and one of the perverted justice volunteers says, I said, what's happening? And they say, well, remember the fellow who showed up yesterday naked? I said, hard to forget. He said, well, he's online again wanting to meet another teen boy nearby. I said, well, set up a meeting at the McDonald's. We left the house, and sure enough, we're waiting there, and he walks into the McDonald's, pulls up in his red pickup truck, and we're walking up to catch him coming out, and I'm trying to think, what I'm going to say to him, and I don't want to send him running to get run over by a car necessarily, nor do I want to be fumbling for words. I'm kind of going over my head what I'm going to say, and I said to him the only thing I could think of, which was, at the time I've been in this business 24 years, I've very seldom been at a loss for words, but I don't know what to ask you first. And that was the truth. It's like, how the hell do you do this? You get caught, you keep going, and it speaks to the compulsion and the addiction of the internet and this sort of behavior. And again, I was in the studio yesterday for the podcast, Predators I've Caught, and we were looking at the case of a then 26-year-old sixth grade teacher who surfaced in our investigation in Ohio, James Rutherford. And I try to immerse myself in the moments before I do the podcast, and this guy just laid it out and explained it as so many other guys have experienced it, which is, I couldn't get away from this online conversation. I was seduced, or I got addicted to the nature, the access, the anonymity, and all of a sudden I'm blurring this line between fantasy and reality, and I'm walking inside this house here, and instead of a 13-year-old girl, I'm meeting you, and it's quite a phenomenon.
Yeah. Not that these guys are using their brains exactly, but I always wonder, they come in, they talk to you, or they talk to the police, and they're running their mouths. Don't they know not to speak unless there's a lawyer present? I mean, it's unbelievable to me.
Well, it's a combination of things. I think it's the fact that I'm genuinely curious to understand what was going on inside their mind. I think they're nervous. I think they're still figuring out, okay, is this really Chris Hansen? Is it the mad dad? Is it the detective? And there's so much going on in their mind that and I think there's a genuine sense of relief that, okay, I'm caught. This is not a good situation, but at least I'm done with this. I'm done leading this sneaky double life. And a lot of these guys have relationships or are married or have something else going on, and this is a part of their secret life. And I think there's some sense of relief that it's over, and as bad as the situation is, and it's going to get worse once they, encounter law enforcement outside the house, they're done. They can move on from there, and I think that's part of the reason why they talk. And in some cases, I think they figure out that they might as well hang around, have a cookie, and chat with me, because what's going to happen to them next is not pleasant. They're going to go down to the police station and the sheriff's department. They're going to be interrogated and locked up.
Yeah,
they're delaying that moment, that inevitability.
Speaking of the cookies, I've wondered if word has ever gotten around and people just show up who aren't part of the investigation and want to meet you and get some snacks, or if that's ever happened.
Never happened. The only slightly humorous snack-related event that we had was somebody forgot to cover the brownies one night, and we mic things very carefully. The sound guys are very good at what they do, very fastidious, and the brownies got left out, and so the guy sits down, and the decoy's left, and I'm waiting for the moment to walk out, and he takes a bite of this brownie that has obviously become hard as a rock overnight. I thought he was going to lose a tooth because you could hear it on the mic just cracking, and walked out, and that's how we started the interview. But yeah, it's a lot of behind the scenes moments. I mean, imagine, how many moving parts there are to that investigation, and just the craziness behind the scenes is a story in and of itself.
No, definitely. So, in the course of doing these investigations, have you ever genuinely feared for your safety? Has it been a really dangerous moment?
I think there have been some times after the fact where I've thought, wow, that could have gone a couple of different ways. I've never felt like I had to hit the floor or like a bullet was going to be heading my way. I mean, you learn things about guys afterwards that make you pause. But generally speaking, I feel that I'm well protected in these situations. We've got security for me. We've got security for the premises, for the crew, and we think it through in detail. So for what it is, I think we're absolutely as safe as we can possibly be. But no, there's never anything that we held back or didn't show or totally freaked me out. I mean, yeah, there were some things that happened that get your attention, but we usually have the upper hand in this because of the element of surprise, and because you design it so you have control over the situation. And the truth is that a lot of people who commit these crimes are somewhat cowardly, and they prey upon children because they can't manage to deal with adults. So you have that upper hand as well. And once you do it 20 or 30 times, you start to get the hang of it.
Yeah. I had heard, though, that the investigation stopped because there was a suicide, and was that the reason they stopped doing them? Because no, it's not.
No, there was that suicide. There was a case in Texas where an assistant district attorney surfaced in the investigation. He did not actually come to the house, but he had been chatting online with a young teen boy. And in Texas, the solicitation online constitutes the allegation of a felony. So the police went out to arrest him the next day, and he, as they were coming in, he sadly took a revolver and shot himself in the head and took his own life. Come to find out that he had multiple images of child pornography on his computer. He tried to get the hard drive out of his laptop. He couldn't do it. And, as an assistant district attorney, he knew that in Texas, he faced, every bit of 10 years in prison per image that he had in his possession. And so he didn't want to, I can't say what he was exactly thinking, but the collective wisdom is that he didn't want to face those allegations and took his own life. But we continued after that to do a number of different investigations. I think ultimately at NBC, it was decided that they could repurpose this vast treasure trove of raw material into multiple different versions of the Predator investigation for years and have the same revenue without spending the big money to go do a new investigation. But we continued to do them for a period of time at NBC. I did the Hansen versus Predator independently that ended up airing as a series on Crime Watch Daily as a part of that. And again, we're out doing it right now. So it's not the easiest investigation to do, and it presents its challenges, but I think it's important. I think it's compelling, and I think there's very definitely a need and a demand for it. So we're going to keep doing it.
Definitely. That's great. So you've done a lot of these. Have people recognized you a lot on the streets? Is this usually what they mention? Have there been any interesting stories or former subjects who you've come across, anything like that?
I can't think off the top of my head a former Predator target. There have been some interesting encounters over the years. I remember a couple years ago, I was in a shop looking at an item, and the clerk was showing it to me, and he was sweating profusely on his forehead. And I said, "Are you okay?" And this is pre-COVID and all that. And it looked like he was feverish and not well. And he said, "Well, you don't have a hidden camera on me right now, do you?" I said, "No, man, I'm just trying to get a last-minute gift here." He was all anxious that I had him caught in some sort of a scam, and he was sweating. But yeah, I mean, people recognize for the predator thing, obviously, and for a lot of other stories that I've done over the years. But it's the predator thing is something that has gone into the next generation. It's had that kind of an impact, that kind of an iconic effect. I joke often that my kids, the two older kids who are now adults and actually working in this business, one's a reporter, one's behind the scenes, they didn't think it was a big deal to have a dad on television. They went to high school with kids whose dads were motion picture directors and Titans of Wall Street and all kinds of restaurant owners, and so it wasn't a big deal. But when South Park did a Chris Hansen To Catch a Predator episode, suddenly I was like the coolest dad around. So, but it also speaks to the fact that it did work its way into pop culture, and for a combination of reasons continues to be there today. Whether you're 70 or 17, people know it, and you come to a point in your career as a journalist where you say, okay, I'm either going to embrace this and use it for all the good that it can bring, or you spend the rest of your time running away from it. And I tell people all the time, I've got 10 Emmys, none of them are for Predator, they're for other stories, other investigations. We do other things all the time, but that's the way it developed. I will continue to use it for good and for the benefit of telling important, critical, compelling stories. And I'll take that. I'll take that mantle.
Sure. So a couple more questions. You're obviously doing the Predator investigation again. You said it's going to be different. You're taking it to another level. Can you give us kind of a preview? What does that mean? What can we expect differently than before?
Well, it's still being worked out, but I think the difference is going to be that we will have a set that's more interactive. In other words, we'll go out and shoot the investigations in a pretty traditional way, the kind of thing you've seen along the way. But then I may have people on from law enforcement or who are involved in different aspects of the investigation and talk about certain parts of it, to break it down, to actually have a set, that sort of thing. That's what's being discussed right now. And again, it's going to depend where it ends up in terms of the formal production format of it all. But that's what we're thinking about, taking it to the next level.
Yeah. So you mentioned none of your Emmys were obviously for this, even though I think you should have won one. But
I was nominated for the Predator show.
That's close.
Yeah.
I know you covered some really other dark stories. Is there one that really stood out to you that you went into?
Yeah, I mean, a lot of the breaking news stories, 9/11, Oklahoma City. I mean, those things live with you forever. And look, Oklahoma, 9/11 was my generation, our generation's Pearl Harbor. So you remember where you were that day. You remember what you did for the next 2 months covering it. Oklahoma City was the same. But the one that always sticks with me, because I think we did some good in a couple of different ways. We got some kids freed from a sex slave situation. We educated people, and we went to Cambodia and working with an NGO called the International Justice Mission, went undercover and posed as sex tourists in a brothel, visiting a brothel in Cambodia, about 11 kilometers outside Phnom Penh, in a place called Svay Pak, and we infiltrated it, and we went in with hidden cameras, and we saw, girls as young as 6, 7, 8 years old being sold for sex to tourists from America, Europe, and throughout Asia. And we exposed this in an hour special, and it got a lot of attention. Then went back about 4 or 5 years later to check on the girls who were rescued. 37 girls got rescued, and we visited with half a dozen of them who were in a bridge school, and to see that in that one way that these young women's lives were better because of what we did, and they really didn't. I went back to visit them, and my Khmer isn't that good, so we had a translator, obviously, and at the end of the interview, they said, "When are you going back?" I said, "Well, I'm going back, tomorrow." And they said, "Can we go to the airport with you?" And I said, "Sure, as long as it's okay with the folks here at the school." And the guy said to me later, the head of the school said, "I don't want to minimize this emotional moment they had with you. They obviously know you helped change their lives. But the reason why they want to go to the airport is that's where the only Dairy Queen is in Phnom Penh." I said, I'm good for a half dozen banana splits. Let's do it. So we're at the airport. We're getting ready to fly back from Cambodia, and here they show up in the tuk-tuk, and all the girls get out, and we go through the greeting and we sit down, and we all have banana splits, and we're wrapping it up, and I'm going to go right through the big glass door to the airport and check in and fly out to the Phnom Penh into Hong Kong or wherever I was going next. And they started to get emotional, and they started to cry, and now I'm getting emotional. Now the big tough cameraman's getting emotional, the producer's getting emotional, and so this continues, and we're goodbye, thank you, holding hands, and very emotional. And I go in to check in. Now they can't go past the glass door, and I look back, and they've got their hands pressed up against the glass. And I go back, I get on a line, and press my hands up against the glass, and it was, I get choked up telling the story to this very day. And the cameraman, God bless him, stuck with it all, and it made for, I can't think of anything more compelling that I've ever done or seen in my life than that connection with those young women who, we were able to help in this investigation. And, those are the things that out of a blessed career, where I've had the opportunity to see things and do things that many humans don't get a chance to do. That is a moment that absolutely stands out in my life.
Sure. So finally, I know you've done some investigations into the pandemic lately. Is there a subject you haven't gone into that you'd like to do something in depth on? That one that if you had anything you could pick, if there was one that would stand out.
I'm a curious guy. There are a ton of things that I want to do, and the one thing that I've worked on and done stories about, and I speak about, and I talk to those who've been in the trade for a long time. People say human trafficking and use this blanket form, and when you go to a network to pitch a story on it, they say, okay, great, well, we'll do this during international month against human trafficking or whatever with the UN. But I think there's a way to do it and involve proactive characters who have been caught up in it. And I don't have it nailed in my mind exactly how it's going to go, but I'm very close. And I think that's going to be one of the series that I pitch next, because I think it goes on, and I'm mindful of the Superbowl happening this weekend, and the FBI and those who, keep track of this will tell you any major event like this is, ground zero that week for human trafficking in all kinds of forms. And I think there's a proactive series that will really put a face to it and not just make it this, oh yeah, this is bad. We need to have a week or wear a color for it. It's something that needs to be exposed almost in the same kind of way that we did, online predators with To Catch a Predator and Have a Seat with Chris Hansen, Hansen versus Predator. So I think where I'm going to put some energy into that next, and
great,
really give it a go.
And lastly, since you mentioned it, Buccaneers or Chiefs?
Oh, I'm going with Brady, Bucs.
Yeah, the GOAT.
The GOAT. The older I get, the more I follow the older players. I think it's going to be a great game, and that's no hit on Kansas City. I think Andy Reid's a great coach, and Patrick Mahomes and that whole team are phenomenal young players, and nothing would surprise me in that game. Mm-hmm. But I'm going with my guy, Tom.
Yeah. He's probably going to win. Although I have met Andy Reid, so I do like him, but I prefer Brady.
I know more than the average bear about Andy Reid, and I have deep respect for him for a lot of reasons. And look, the Tampa Bay coach is a great guy too, but Reid's his own guy, and he's had his own personal challenges in life, family challenges, and has come through it, and with his head held high, and nobody knows what those miles are like to walk, and I was glad to see him win it last year, and I'm glad to see him in it this year too.
Yeah, last year was about time. So.
Yeah, no, it was well deserved. He earned every second of it.
Well, again, thanks for coming on. It was
AJ,
great
my
talk.
pleasure, buddy.
Fantastic. Appreciate it. Thanks.
Take care.